Good afternoon. Good afternoon, everyone. It's okay to talk back. Good afternoon. Yay. On behalf of the Office of Inclusive Excellence, I would like to welcome you all to the Accelerating Inclusive Excellence report and discussion. We have two audiences. Well, we have one audience, and our audience is participating in two different modalities. Of course, we have you here, which I'm very happy to see. And then we have our virtual audience, so our virtual participants. So we're going to do some things a little bit differently than what I've done in the past to try and connect the experience. And by that, I mean, we have a poll everything environment that is going to be used to capture feedback during our forum discussion and our report out. As you all know, the Office of Inclusive Excellence has worked in partnership with many of you to help us get to this particular point today, which is to share out information regarding our diversity, equity, and inclusion inventory, our dialogue sessions, and get us to a place where we can talk about where we are as an institution, as well as some recommendations to move us forward. I want to introduce the Office of Inclusive Excellence team, which has great energy. I'm really blessed and excited to have these members as my teammates. First, you saw students at the door welcoming you and making sure that you're in the right place and you have the right information. Those two students are Kenneth Starkey III and Octavio Martinez, and I'd like to just acknowledge them for their leadership and their support. They also help us keep our finger on the pulse of the student experience on campus. They give us honest feedback, honest input. They try to keep us relevant because, when you have a year or two, like me, away from the undergraduate experience, then sometimes your way of thinking can be not always in line with what's really going on with their daily experience. Also, I want to give a gratitude to the other teammates, Executive Assistant Lucero Ordonez, Assistant Director of Strategic Initiatives, Cheryl Landon, and our Deputy University Diversity Officer, Ariel Stevenson. And those three champions are the ones that tell me where I'm supposed to be, when I'm supposed to be there, and what I'm supposed to do when I get there. So I appreciate them very much. We also have partners that are part of our office, faculty fellows, faculty friends, and faculty liaisons. We have one of our fellows here today, Dr. Trinidad. I'd like to acknowledge him for his partnership and support. Thanks, Dr. Trinidad. And then we have a partner that's been with us throughout the work that we've been doing, my time here and even predating me. That would be institutional planning and analysis. Cameron Stevenson and Dominique Harrison, thank you for your partnership. So as most of you know, we've partnered with the Center for Strategic Diversity Leadership and Social Innovation, which is led by Dr. Damon A. Williams. And in a few minutes, he's going to join us and share information about the process that they went through to gather information, the findings throughout their process, and then, of course, recommendations. These recommendations are going to be high-level recommendations, and the key findings are also going to be high-level. I do want to assure you that there is a comprehensive report that will be coming. It's a week or so away. Along with that report will be a data file, is what I'm going to call it. And that data file will be used to develop a dashboard, which Cheryl Landon and our IT team will be working to develop. That information is going to be extremely important for leveraging our path and our direction as an institution strategically. So let's stay tuned. So now, a few housekeeping items. As we listen to Dr. Williams in a few minutes, he will share information for perhaps 10 or 15 minutes. He'll reach a point where he's going to open it up for Q&A. There's going to be 3 ways to participate in Q&A. For our online virtual members, you have the chat function that you can use to enter questions or comments. If you have a question, the chat function will be monitored, and we will elevate those questions or the themes from those questions to perhaps Ariel or Cheryl, and they'll voice that question to Dr. Williams here. The second way for our virtual participants is to use the raise your hand function. Most of us know where that is. If you don't, it's an icon at the bottom of your Zoom screen. And if you raise your hand, you will be elevated into a queue type arrangement, and then we'll get you to a place where you can ask that question yourself. And then the third way is for you, our audience is right here. There's a mic in the center of this ballroom. When you have a question, please make your way to the mic, and we'd be happy to give you that opportunity to share. As we get towards the end of our hour or hour and 15 minutes, there's going to be an opportunity for you to give feedback. And for our online audience, the links will be placed in the chat function, the Poll Everything environment link first, and then the questions and or suggestions link also will be placed there. For those of you that are here, you have the QR code. The red side is for the end of the forum, and the green side is for now, okay? And with that, I think we are nearly ready to go. I'm looking at my team to give me a signal. Okay, so let's do that. But before we do that, I'm going to ask us just to pause for about 15 seconds, okay? Give us a moment to get grounded, recognize not only the space that we're in, but how did you show up today? Who helped you get here in this moment? Whose shoulders might you be standing on? What ancestors came before you to blaze the trail for you to arrive in this moment, at this time, right now? 10 seconds.
We acknowledge that the land on which we gather here is the traditional territory of the Luiseño Payacuichan people. Today, the meeting place of CSUSM and its surrounding areas is still home to the 6 federally recognized bands of the La Jolla, Pala, Palma, Pachanga, Rincon, Soboba, Luiseño Payacuichan people. It is also important to acknowledge that this land remains a shared space among the Quepeño, Kumeyaay, and Ipai peoples. CSUSM has long-standing mutual beneficial relationships with the local tribal communities in San Diego. which has 18 federally recognized reservations, home to more than any county in the United States. I hope that you can take this opportunity to learn more about the local indigenous people from the region during your time here. Welcome to CSUSM.
Okay. And is Dr. Williams on standby? All right. Well, let's welcome him into our space.
Yes, this is Damon Williams. Can you hear me?
Good afternoon.
Yes, Dr. Allen, I'm having a little bit of technical difficulty. I am able to, I think, speak and communicate, but I'm not able to start my camera. It says that the host has stopped it. So I don't know if there's something you all can switch on your end. And even if you can't see me, my question is, can you now see my presentation? Okay, great. So if you can see my presentation and you can hear me, Dr. Allen, could you just come back to the microphone, please, and just give me a thumbs up? All right. Thank you so much for that thumbs up, Dr. Allen. I appreciate you, my friend. Cal State University, San Marcos, CSUSM. It's great to be with you here today and to talk about the work that we've been doing in partnership over the last several months with the Office of Inclusive Excellence, and importantly, with all the leaders of the university and so many of you that participated in the various different listening sessions that we had the privilege to engage in. As was noted, my name is Damon Williams. I am Chief Catalyst for the National Inclusive Excellence Leadership Academy, the Center for Strategic Diversity Leadership and Social Innovation, and most importantly, I like to say friend to thousands of DEI champions everywhere. Many of the ideas that I'll talk about today are nested in my scholarship, which I've been engaged in for north of 25 years, looking at issues of diversity, equity, inclusion, and critically issues of organizational change, issues of strategy, issues of structure, issues of processes, systems, accountability, reward structures, DEI offices, infrastructures. How do we build the type of capability that's going to allow us to create more inclusive environments for us all? How do we build the types of environments that are going to allow us to overcome equity challenges that we have, whether it be in graduation rates or in time to tenure and completion? How are we ultimately going to advance what we refer to as our inclusive excellence agenda? One of the things we've been engaged in for now more than 2 decades is this inclusive excellence movement. And I know that Dr. Allen leads the Office of Inclusive Excellence. I know that many of you have heard this idea, heard this language for years now. And I've been very fortunate to be a part of this conversation from its genesis, from its beginning, when the Association of American Colleges and Universities launched the Inclusive Excellence Movement in 2004. And I think that beginning point is important to create this continuity from our beginning in the conversations that we had in California, in Long Beach, talking about the future of diversity, equity, and inclusion in American higher education, talking about where we needed to go as a ecosystem of institutions. And what we talked about and what we ultimately published was we defined this idea of inclusive excellence as a comprehensive organizational change effort, which really had to take this work of diversity, equity, and inclusion and really position it as fundamental to institutional excellence. Not something that was simply the work of a, quote, diversity officer, not something that was just the work of activist students, faculty, and staff, but how do we move it more comprehensively, more systematically into our institutional environment? How do we make it a part of the air that we breathe? One of the things that really struck me as we were doing some of our discovery work, as we were beginning this journey with CSUSM, was language that we saw in your website in an article that talked about diversity issues, equity issues, justice issues is a part of the DNA of our institution. It's a part of what we believe to be important. And as we moved into our study, as we moved into our efforts to be a partner with you, those were some of the themes that came out, as well as other themes that we found to be opportunity areas. Of course, one of the things that we all know is that the diversity idea has continued to evolve and expand. It is an idea now that for more than 6 decades has come to touch multiple different communities from its beginning points, nested in the civil rights movement, nested in the movement for full representation for African Americans, and later other historically underrepresented, marginalized, and some would say, quote, minoritized groups, to evolve to a conversation 6 decades later that when we talk about defining diversity, we talk about it in terms of ability. We talk about it now in terms of mental health. We talk about it in terms of economic background. We talk about it in terms of age. We talk about it in terms of religion, gender, sexuality, positional role, nationality, race, ethnicity, and also intersectional dynamics that interconnect all of these different social identities together. Some would say this expansion of the idea is one that has opened up the umbrella of conversation of inclusion. Others would say that it is watered down conversations connected to an agenda of anti-racism, that it's watered down connected to an agenda that is centered on disrupting racial inequities. I would say that we have to be in a space of both and, not either or, that we open up the conversation in ways that allow us to move forward strategically, not to advance each of these different identities in the same way, but to advance each of them in ways that creates a context in which we privilege the challenges and the opportunities, and yet we understand that the efforts that we put forward are going to be different. But at many of our institutions, we have built capacity to advance diversity broadly defined, not only in terms of how we define it in terms of different social identities, but how we think about diversity, equity, and inclusion in terms of our institutional capabilities. Our institutional capabilities. Most of us don't wake up in the morning and say, oh, what are our organizational diversity capabilities? But indeed, CSUSM is an institution with myriad of different tactical things, programmatic things, offices, centers, units, research efforts, training programs, courses, requirements, each of these various different efforts that are a part of defining your various different capacities. When Dr. Allen first came to campus not too terribly long ago, one of the first things he said was, I need to know what's going on. I need to know where our capabilities are. I need to understand these various different themes or threads of what we're doing each and every day to advance diversity such that we can get more cohesive, we can get more connected, we can get more demonstrative and stronger in what we're doing. And so one of the things that we do in partnership with institutions, and it's been a privilege to be in partnership with you all, absolutely fantastic. My team and I have thoroughly enjoyed all of it. Huge shout out to the staff of the Office of Inclusive Excellence for being so responsive and so easy to work with. But one of the things we do is we lay out a framework of how to think about these various different things that are going on in a more cohesive and structured way. So there are efforts going on the campus, in the campus community that are focused on achieving access to the institution and equity of outcomes, things that are around recruitment, retention, outreach for students, for faculty, for staff. We also have efforts that are taking place on campus that really center on preparing students for a diverse and global world, not just about getting folks in the environment or even their success, but how are we ensuring that all of our students, irrespective of racial background, ethnic background, economic background, area of disciplinary inquiry and study, areas of diversity defined in terms of gender identity or sexual orientation or any of the various ways, how are all of our students being prepared to lead in a world that is diverse, global, and requires competencies to be able to lead and navigate in this environment in the 21st century. But we also have within our institutional environment those who get up every day and make scholarship domestic and international scholarship, global scholarship, their reason for being in terms of advancing their scholarly agendas of inquiry. But also, too, in our institutional environments, we have, and it sits at the center, the efforts that we put forward each and every day to create a more affirming experience for all the various different groups that are a part of our institutions, but also what we do to advance DEI training, to help us to have competencies, to put in place policies that allow us to respond to bias, that put in place research programs to help us to understand the lived experience of inclusion and the lived experience of exclusion, the lived experience of psychological safety, the lived experience of psychological lack of safety. Is our environment a space where we can come together to learn? Is our environment such that we can come together to contribute? And is our environment such that we can come together and challenge? The highest level of psychological safety requires the ability to feel safe and not at risk when we offer challenges. But what situates much of this effort is the DEI strategy and the infrastructure that we have in place. Do we have an overall institutional plan for inclusive excellence? In what ways do we have committees or DEI officers or DEI leads across our institutional environment? How are we bringing together an experience which is defined by accountability, consistent communication, transparency, engagement? But we know, particularly in the current era in which we're leading diversity, equity, and inclusion work today, is it's not just the strategy and the infrastructure. It's not just these various programmatic things we're doing across these dimensions of the pyramid model that you have before you, but it's also what we're doing externally. How are we connecting with the broader community, with our alumni, with our donors? In some instances, in some places, how are we connecting with parents, legislatures, others external to the environment that play a dramatic role in influencing who we are and what happens on campus each and every day. As we continue forward and think about these categories, one of the things that we've done in our research, and I won't go through this as demonstratively as I would if I had more time, but there's in each of these different categories that align to that infographic I just showed, we have now mapped your efforts to them. For example, in terms of DEI general infrastructure, these are efforts to initiate, coordinate, and lead DEI efforts in various ways. Some of the examples that we've identified is the recent Senate Task Force, the Office of Inclusive Excellence. In terms of recruitment, retention, and outreach, we've identified the Mobile Making STEM Ambassador Outreach Program, the Compass Grant Program, the PhD Project Partnership centered on business faculty recruitment efforts. We have gone through and across each of these categories have identified the various different inputs that you gave us and organized them, coded them, and developed a tool that can be used to enhance your efforts in various ways to advance diversity, equity, and inclusion. Some of the ways this information has proven helpful at other institutions that we've worked with is one, it's been used to drive planning, change management, and innovation initiatives. I know that one of the things that Dr. Allen has talked about consistently is this desire to move forward even more strongly together. This resource will help in that regard. Number two is to support grant writing and fundraising to illustrate how DEI is being activated on campus, whether you're pursuing federal grants, you're pursuing state grants, you're pursuing private foundation grants, or you're engaged in critical conversations with various different partners that want to make an investment in the future of CSUSM. We also know that this tool is helpful to drive greater understanding of what's going on institutionally. If your DEI officer can't tell you what's going on institutionally, and it's that individual's job to collaborate and to galvanize all of you, how do you move together more cohesively? How do we move together more integrated in fashion? We have provided a resource that will be helpful in that regard. We also think it helps us to find those efforts that are going on that are moving very positively in a particular direction and really warrant more attention, more efforts to scale up, identifying places where we can enhance quality. And last and definitely not least, each institution has requirements to report out, whether it's around accreditation, whether it's around the system office, whether it's around other types of government efforts, and your ability to do that will be powerfully enhanced by the resources that we've pulled together. And we think that that's instrumental as you forge forward and continue to strengthen partnerships that help to embolden the work of the university now and into the future. As we think about our efforts on our campuses, oftentimes they look like this. Just myriad of things that we do. And so the question and the answer that we're trying to help provide to the university is, how do we move from capacities that are moving by each other to a more aligned effort where there's a campus-wide inclusive excellence strategic action plan that leadership, faculty, staff, and students can be aligning to, that the CDO and the Office of Inclusive Excellence can be a centrifugal force, not that is commanding and controlling anyone, but is able to be a partnering and collaborating initiator to catalyze greater possibilities on campus. And the totality of what we've done has really centered in helping to accomplish this. One of the things that we say often when I teach in my leadership academy, and I have the good fortune to speak in communities like this, is that we know that our DEI efforts can't breathe, they can't soar, they can't endure without air, accountability, infrastructures that are aligned, integration into how we're making decisions and how we're creating priorities, and an allocation of resources, financial resources, human resources, technical resources, even symbolic resources towards moving our agendas forward. DEI efforts can't breathe without air. And so as we think about this as kind of the operative framework for the work that we've done, we went into our efforts and we fielded a survey that was responded to not by everybody at large the way it would be if we were fielding a campus climate or some type of engagement or experience survey, but this was a survey that was intended to capture what is going on in the various different units, divisions, and areas that guide and lead the institution in terms of your formal leadership governance structure. And so it was inside of that we received north of 550 plus different efforts, what we call DEI programs, broadly defined across these various different areas of the institution. And as I identified previously, we've now mapped them, coded them. We're in a process of cleaning that, and we'll ultimately provide you with the database that you can use for dashboards and use for various different strategic efforts moving forward. We also spent time in conversation with many of you, whether it was student athletes, international faculty and staff, tenure track faculty, veteran students. We were slated to do, I think, roughly 25 listening sessions in friendship and partnership to the university, and as a way of privileging so many who wanted to be a part of that conversation, we actually did conversations with north of 40 plus listening groups, touching nearly 400 individuals who were participating in those listening sessions. And so as we think about the journey that we've been on, we have gathered information across your 550 DEI programs. We've gathered critical information about where you are in terms of air, accountability, infrastructure, integration, and resources. And we've listened to the voices of the community in an effort to pull together not only a data system that we'll give you, but a set of reports that will have inside of them various different themes and insights that we've learned. And one of the things that our team does is we never do the work unless we're doing the work towards having some recommended steps of action, right? Some recommended steps of action that are so important. And so as we think about this journey, what were some of the critical insights from the inventory? What were some of the critical insights from the dialogue that we can share with you preliminarily? When we began this work, we were still very much in the COVID reality, and it was intended to be a purely virtual project. I am very thankful for all of the partnership and the friendship that we've had, and we actually have added something onto the project at the very end, where I'm gonna have an opportunity to come to campus and spend some time with you at a time that Dr. Allen and our teams are working to get laid into the future after the reports have been delivered, after we have made our final recommendations. So I'm looking forward to that. But in terms of some of the preliminary things we've learned, some of those big picture ideas is. One of the things, again, we did is we surveyed these 15 units, right? And so as we surveyed these units, the unit was responding as a cohesive representation of what that unit's perspective and what that unit's efforts were to advance diversity, equity, and inclusion. And we had 15 units that responded. The first thing that we learned was that there's a strong sense that we are committed to DEI and that this is a positive and important part of our values and an important part of what we believe to be important. Now, one of the things that we have as well, and this will be a part of your final report, is we actually have other institutions that we have done similar processes with. And so we like to take some of these data and put them in that broader context. A score of 80% is actually right where we would want to see or higher in terms of this idea of being committed to this work of diversity, equity, and inclusion. You would be surprised that as we fielded this with some other institution, that numbers come in at 50%. That numbers come in at 60%, where it's just not on the radar at all. And so when I think about where you are in an organizational maturity perspective, clearly this is on your radar. Clearly this is something that you have efforts that you've done in the past. But the question is, how do you go from where you are to better? How do you go from good to great? How do you move from the steps that you've made to accelerate to a higher gear to another level? One of the things that we know is that DEI plans can't breathe without air. A part of that means that the actual development of a DEI strategy has to cascade from an institutional framework to the unit level. So as we ask the question, is there a unit level DEI strategy across these 15 units? Only 7% could say yes. We would want that number to be at 75 plus to 100%. Only 33% said they had DEI committee infrastructure. We know that having a set of leaders who are at the local level, who are grappling with these issues, is an important part of advancing the work. 27% have some type of a DEI officer or a lead, a DEI lead. We know that every a unit is not going to have a full-time officer. That's not necessary. But we do believe that every unit should have dedicated DEI leadership, which is a part of the lateral DEI infrastructure, which is aligning and connecting and partnering up with the Office of Inclusive Excellence to bring together, again, not efforts that are swimming by each other, but a more cohesive effort swimming in the same direction. 33% reported that we have sufficient resources to support the needs of diverse students. That number around diverse staff was about 27%, and diverse faculty was between the was a bit higher than the 33%, and it was around 40%. As we think about this idea of resources, we know that resources are challenged, and a part of what we learned was not a elevation of a new insight, but even a more demonstrative validation of what is, and I think requires even more focus and effort on how we bring more resource into the institution, as opposed to simply having a perspective of the challenge. We also found that about 7% said that we make DEI a part of our annual report, meaning that we are being publicly and transparently accountable for what we have done in terms of diversity, equity, and inclusion as an organizational unit. Again, as we think about this idea of integration into what we do, accountability, alignment, one of the things we believe is that this number has to be much higher. It has to be near to 100%, that everyone is making this a part of the transparent storytelling, accounting, and being accountable to where we're going. 53% said that it was a part of the annual performance review, meaning that it was in some way, shape, or form a part of the annual review of the people that were in their unit. Now, the one thing I will say is this was a really striking finding for us, not only in that it was much higher than some of the other indicators that I'm showing to you, but it actually is much higher than our national indicators as well. And we didn't quite know exactly where that came from. Generally, you'll see more units that have a report that they're doing, that maybe have a plan, maybe have committee, then you will saying that it's a part of the performance review infrastructure. And so we think that's actually a great area to build from, individual accountability, and how do we strengthen the definition of what that performance reviewing looks like, and how do we scale that across the institution. So one of the things I'm a huge believer in is search and reapply. Search and reapply. So if we see something that's novel, that's innovative, that is moving in the right direction, how do we take the lessons from that and apply it and move it universally throughout the system to make it a more systematic effort? 33% said they were engaged in sufficient training around DEI for faculty, and about 47% said they had sufficient training in place for staff. And so as we think about this, we think that there's opportunity areas here as well. These preliminary findings that we have, which came out of the inventory survey, were in many ways tethered and connected in our triangulation efforts to what we heard in the 40+ listening sessions with the nearly 400 CSUM community participants. So inside of those listening sessions, we talk about this idea of the voice of community members. 10 ideas that really flowed through that I wanted to elevate. One was this consistent critique that our DEI efforts are performative, that we really need a multidimensional framework to guide our strategy, to become more accountable, and it needs to have a focus on anti-racism. Now, I'm going to go into the difference between DEI and anti-racism in the next set of slides, but this came out and that was very consistent with, yes, there's high commitment that we're doing and espousing. Yes, we are moving forward in various ways, but we're very disconnected. One of the things that we know is that there's always a persisting critique that we hear from our communities around diversity, equity, inclusion. Not going fast enough, not getting enough done. It doesn't impact me. So as we think about this, one of the techniques that we believe takes diversity from being an ephemeral thing that lives up here to something that's landing much more powerfully and prominently is to cascade and to integrate and to infrastructure and to accountability at the unit level, hence the data I just walked through. Second thing we saw is that we need a broad, inclusive, and shared definition of social justice, diversity, equity, and inclusion that includes many diverse groups: international, race, religion, LGBTQ. There was a persisting critique that, again, if we go back to that opening graphic I showed of people moving beyond each other because we don't have a common language, moving beyond each other because we don't have an inclusive definition of what it means to be diverse. That was something we heard and we sensed inside of our listening. A third theme that we heard was a need to have a consistent focus on diversity, faculty, staff, recruitment, retention, and succession. How do we move forward and think about those who are in this experience at CSUSM, who want to be here, who want to advance and elevate, and in what ways can we create initiativing that helps and supports that movement? That we need consistent, nuanced, and encompassing DEI training. This was something that, again, was heard in multiple different spaces with lots of different types of language. Sometimes the language wasn't training. It was to say people need to learn about each other. We need to learn some of these issues. I am uncomfortable talking about many of these topics. How do I get better talking about it? Lots of ways it inputted to us as we listened within the community, but really the need to create not just a set of things that we're doing, but how do we get an overall cohesive framework around DEI learning and competency building? How do we make that a part of the work that we're doing around faculty development, student development, staff development? Another piece of this is, again, we need more resources. Not anything new here, but consistent and persistently heard across our listening. The APITA group was particularly impressive and cohesive in terms of expressing feelings of marginalization, feeling as if they were invisible in some ways, not an institutional priority, that they were not at the table of conversation making, that the conversation was such that it did not include Asian Pacific Islander, DESI American communities, Asian communities, and that this group, the APITA group, needed an elevation in the conversation. Another theme that we heard was that staff, and this is not uncommon, when we generally field campus climate and inclusion surveys and just look at responses through the lens of students, faculty, staff often will have the report the least positive experience. And so as we heard this resonating inside of our listening, staff reported feeling vulnerable to supervisors, particularly if you were in context where maybe you had elevated your voice to express some type of criticism or some type of perceived inequity. And I use that language, perceived inequity, because I don't know if it's true or it's not, but the perception was such, and this sense of vulnerability that manifests, and we heard that in our listening. We also heard faculty and staff as we come through the pandemic really desiring to continue to have different types of workplace flexibilities post us being in the heart of the pandemic as we've now moved into the endemic phases. One of the things that I gave a talk on recently was around the future of work, and everyone is talking about flexibility, choice, and being able to be nimble and responsive to individuals and their needs as the world of work has evolved. We heard other themes connected to this notion of microaggression, right? Everyday insults, everyday invalidations, not necessarily things that we don't hear when we listen to campuses. We hear this consistently when we listen to campus, and we did hear that with you. And we particularly heard it in terms of some faculty talking about perceptions of vulnerability, particularly as it relates to being junior faculty versus senior faculty. This was something that flowed through in some of our listening. And then last, and definitely not least, in terms of just major tensions or themes that we heard, was a vibration of tension involving police, campus, community interactions. And we heard that on both sides. There was members of communities that talked about tensions. There was member of the police force who talked about tensions. This is not uncommon, given where we are right now and all that has transpired across, in particular, the last nearly 3 years, as there's been an elevation of conversation around communities of color, community-based policing, law enforcement. When I was a global officer with the Boys and Girls Clubs of America, one of the things that we did is we actually created a national integrated conversational dialogue project involving hundreds of thousands of diverse teens across all 50 states and local law enforcement agencies as a part of President Obama's efforts around 21st century policing and community building. This is a tension that we've been experiencing now for generations. In recent years became more acute. We heard vibrations around these themes, an area for exploration and building out on behalf of the university. And so one of the kind of overarching kind of meta conceptual ideas that I wanted to just quickly walk through for you and provide some insights around was that inside of our organizations, particularly post 2021 and the tragic death of Mr. George Floyd, we saw a national ripple effect across the country. And our team has been fortunate to work with everybody from the Air Force to the Brooklyn Nets to the University of Florida to the great Cal State San Marcos to Wella Beauty, which is right up the road in California as well. There was a ripple effect across the country and an elevation of a lot of different things around DEI and also anti-racism. And one of the things that as we've now moved through that first uptick of where we are is that we see that there's not a lot of clarity around the difference in DEI change methodology and anti-racism change methodology, that they are not the same thing, that there is connectivity betwixt them, but that they are not the same thing in terms of an organizational change method. In our Leadership Academy, we go very deep into this. I'm just gonna give you a very high level as I have given it to other audiences that I've had a chance to preliminarily talk about your findings. And so when I think about the work you recently went through with the Craven study and the conversation around naming and naming rights and past histories and missteps and issues of race and challenge and equity and challenge and current reality and how do we embrace it and how do we not, one of the things we know is that the anti-racism change methodology, again, is not the DEI change methodology. When we think about the demographic foci of the anti-racism methodology, we're talking about Black, Indigenous, people of color. We are talking squarely about the conversation of race, and some would say even more prominently about the conversation of, quote, anti-Blackness and its contemporary manifestations and racial dynamics as it relates to historically underrepresented people, whether that be Black, whether that be Native, Indigenous, whether that be Latinx, whether that be DESI, Asian communities, but we're talking about broadly defined BIPOC communities. By comparison, the DEI change methodology, much more broad. Those groups are a part of that methodology, but that methodology is talking about diverse social identity groups. And so as I opened up the conversation today, I was very choiceful in choosing that dynamic when I talked about diversity broadly defined and inclusive excellence broadly defined. That is very much nested in a DEI change method, connected to anti-racism, but not exactly the same thing. In terms of orientation to this scourge that we refer to as racism, when we think about racism from a sociological perspective, we oftentimes will talk about racism from an anti-racism change method perspective as ending institutional, ending interpersonal, ending internal, and ending structural, meaning exogenous external forces of racism. Multidimensional, quadratic in nature, focused not only on the broad external to internal, but also talking about institutionalized racism, how racism manifests between people, and also how we internalize racism, causing ourselves to self-defeat, causing ourselves to self-loathe, causing ourselves to hate. That is different than the DEI change methodology, which focuses on removing barriers to equity and inclusion, including racial inequity. Unconscious bias, microaggressive dynamics is essential to create an environment that is inclusive and excellent for all. Inside of this second paradigm, the DEI change method, we're not talking about necessarily the broader forces of structural racism. We're not necessarily talking about all of the dynamics of internal racism. There's certain piece of it that definitely connects to institutional and interpersonal pieces, but not in a one-to-one way. There's difference here. When we talk about the core messaging, and this is one of the areas that becomes really, really elevated when we think about these issues, when we're having those hard conversations on the ground with our precious communities that are calling for an anti-racist change effort, when precious leaders are trying to be responsive to that, but don't necessarily know what to do. And we go back to that opening infographic and we see people walking by each other. Oftentimes it centers in this question of language and messaging. Advancing anti-racism is the only way to move us beyond white supremacy and its continuing legacy. Because in the anti-racism methodology, there's an unapologetic calling out of racial dynamics, calling out of white fragilities, calling out of white supremacies. That is not a part of the language of DEI change methods that have evolved. DEI is about advancing DEI as a good for business, education, and society. Again, connectivity, but widely varied and different. And indeed, it is this core messaging around anti-racism, which is leading to the meta narrative that we're seeing nationally, which centers on a backlash against everything that we've seen and is being called the anti-woke backlash. And we see it playing out legislatively in states like Florida, legislatively in states like Nebraska, legislatively in states like Texas. We see it played out when President Trump, our 45th president, was in office and put forward executive ordering, eliminating DEI training and construing it as an anti-racism methodology that they were trying to end. And so inside of it, again, some connection, but different. And then in terms of strategic approach, so as you were moving forward with the assessment of naming and building and the Craven Committee, you were really engaging in some ways in an anti-racism change method, because that method centers around advancing racial truths, reconciling past wrongdoings, healing racial damage with new plans and initiatives as the foundation to racial progress and overcoming past trauma. By comparison, the DEI change method is about moving forward with plans and initiatives and efforts to accomplish change with no engagement of the past and its lingering trauma. Now that's critically important here. One method is centered and steeped in a historical remembrance and understanding the systemic, symbolic, contemporary trauma and manifestations today that may be bound up in names and symbols, and the other one does not focus on that. And so as you're engaging in that, you're steeping and you're moving in an anti-racism change method, which is again connected but yet different than a DEI change method. And we see that play itself out again historically in terms of tactics around removing landmarks, statues, reframing historical accounts and other legacies of, quote, white supremacy, versus letting symbols and accounts stand, accepting them not as good, but as a part of a troubling racial history, moving beyond them as complicated or irrelevant to current racial inequities. And last and definitely not least, this notion of strategic outcomes. Here, one talking about racial equity outcomes, the other talking about equitable outcomes across the board. So we bring this all together. We see that there's differences in terms of the demographic foci. There's differences in terms of the orientation of racism. There's difference in terms of the core messaging, the strategic approach, historical tactics, and the focus on outcomes. And so as we listen to the campus community, we heard vibrations here. And so this is a part of some of our latest thinking that is coming online right now in real time as we've been engaged in various different studies and various different projects across the ecosystem. So as I move to close, let me leave you with a couple preliminary recommendations, and then I'll turn it back to Dr. Allen and the team, and we'll get into some Q&A. So in terms of preliminary recommendations, what are some top-level things that we think are important? One is we believe it's essential to really develop out a campus-wide DEI action plan and an alignment strategy that is tethered to each division, school, college, the major units that participated in this. We think it should have a scorecard. We think that scorecard should have inside of it not only demographic pieces, it should have climate and inclusion pieces. It should have other elements to create a multidimensional framework for assessing progress. We think that this plan should really elevate if you are going to move forward in an anti-racism method or a DEI method, and really tease and play and engage that and what that means in some prominent ways. We also think that this plan should spark with big bets. We're not talking about just plans that have small moves, but what are one or two things that could accompany those smaller moves that are bigger bet efforts that we really believe will move the agenda for the institution moving forward? Recommendation number 2. Again, coming right out of our data, we think that you should build out a local DEI infrastructure to support the delivering of the plan. We think that some low-hanging opportunities are having DEI leads and committees in each of those reporting units, perhaps even creating faculty equity roles, and that those become a part of a overall cohesive infrastructure aligned in partnership with the Office of Inclusive Excellence. We also think it important for you to establish a comprehensive DEI leadership competency framework, something that can be used overarchingly and can be connected and tethered and aligned to what you're doing in orientations for new faculty, what you're doing in your work with department chairs, what you're doing in your work with student orientation, what you're doing in your work in the Dean of Students office, that it can be connected together as a part of your cohesive strategy. We also believe that in the current era that we're in, there are more resources available around DEI, justice, community engaged related efforts than ever before. And the recommendation that we're making is that institutions need to be horsepowering up their ability to pursue those new billions of dollars that have been flushed into the ecosystem in the last 3 years. And it is at a level of billion with a B, and that's multiple. 5, creating consistent cadence of really engaging DEI, like this type of forum, not every week, not every month, but what is that consistent and transparent way that we're bringing people together, that we're being publicly accountable, that we're being engaged around this work, not just on the backwash of crisis, not just on the backwash of challenge, but as a part of our doing of business. Number 6, how do we strengthen our efforts around faculty, staff, leadership, recruitment, retention, and outreach, and really bringing in a consistent adherence to best practices that exist across the board, perhaps creating a novel big bet initiative that could be used to scale up. And last and definitely not least, as you move this forward, institutions that have large communities like yours, where there's many persons that are invested in this work, many persons that have expertise in this work, many persons who want to be involved in this work. How do you create some competitive internal granting opportunities to really unleash innovation potential coming out of the community as folks can tap into some opportunities to seed some efforts that are aligned to your big picture DEI strategy moving forward. We're working on a couple more additional recommendations to these. When we bring in our final report, we will have those baked in as well. There's a ton of additional information that I could have brought into today's talk, but I want it to be high level, as Dr. Allen said, but yet comprehensive across many different components of what we learned. And last and definitely not least, always directional in terms of what the data, the insights point us to in terms of strategic recommendations and action steps. So with that said, that concludes my formal presentation. I'm gonna take a sip of my water because that was a lot, and I'm gonna turn it over to Dr. Allen and we'll move into a dialogue. Dr. Allen.
Thank you. Does this mic work, or do I need to use that? Okay. Thank you, Dr. Williams. That was meaty. It wasn't all the 7 courses, but it definitely had substance for us to chew on and digest. So thank you, Dr. Williams. I want to open it up for any questions that the audience may have, online or in person. There were framing that he provided in terms of the process, the comparable energy and efforts across the country. He shared some specifics around how we score, if you will, in certain key areas. He provided insights specific to our institution and several recommendations. Any thoughts or comments from us? Okay. Can you make your way to the microphone here in the center?
Nature of the data that was presented and the whole concept that there are strategies that you're looking to move forward for. So I'm happy to be a CSUSM because of that. So congratulations.
Thank you. I want to thank my partners at the center. Dr. Williams does a fantastic job because he swims in this daily, helping institutions. The good news, though, is that he has an amazing team that has worked with our campus here. We were able to create Cougar teams, and some of you were part of those teams, and you worked, diligently to provide information. In some cases, you weren't exactly sure where that information was going or what it was going to be used for. But these recommendations that Dr. Williams is providing are actions that we are committed to pursue. We are moving as a next step into the unit level partnership with you. Most of you are already working on your strategic plans as it relates to the campus-wide strategic initiative. We're looking forward to being your thought partners, thought leaders, and collaborators to help bring air to your work, okay? If you don't have air, then you can't succeed, you can't breathe. Any other questions online? Do we have a question online?
Hi, can anyone hear me?
So while we're getting queued up for the next question, some of Dr. Williams' recommendations align with some of the work that we can take stock in that we're already doing. For example, our AVP, Brittany Brown, is leading a administrative policy equity review committee that is going through policies all across campus to search for equity issues and opportunities for either revision, replacement, improvement. So I'm excited about that work. We're also forming a campus climate work group that some of you may have responded to the recent invitation. And that work group is going to serve as a mechanism to help us sustain our campus climate work, not just at the campus-wide level, but within the schools and the colleges and specific major units across campus. And then, of course, the action planning, which is similar, the action planning work, which is very similar to the scorecard recommendation that Dr. Williams has provided. You know, our hope is to, with you, identify how will you measure success with metrics over a period of time and create continuous improvement opportunities so we can begin addressing the issues of strategic planning within units, transparency, accountability, reporting, and sharing, you know, with each other and with our partners. So are you ready, Ariel? Okay.
Okay, hello everyone. My name is Maria Chem, and I currently work with the Office of Sponsored Projects with the Cal State San Marcos Corporation. I want to first say thank you to everyone who worked on this and you know, it really does make me proud and happy that this was time that was dedicated to an effort to make a report happen. Honestly, right now, I'm just going to share initial thoughts because I feel like there's way too much information to process before really, I don't know, putting something of more value out into the Cal State San Marcos community. But just with initial thoughts, I just wanted to say that it is also very overwhelming to see some of the data. In some respects, even though I'm happy, it also makes me kind of sad to see some of the information that's there. You could probably hear it in my voice. And the reason why it makes me sad is because, I don't know, you know, we come to campus, we love this place, we love our students. And it would be nice if we were in a better situation, because there is so much time and effort that we talk about putting into diversity and inclusion. And I guess in some ways I was hoping for better, to be completely candid. But at the same time, I know that we have to identify where our problems, our issues, our challenges are so that we could actually create those plans and set forward actions to really be connected as a campus and to really make sure that we are you know, meeting those expectations. And to a certain extent, I feel like they're just basic things that we need in our everyday work-life balance. And then also just from this university and knowing what we stand for and for student success and all of that. I don't know, I'm sorry if I'm not really making too much sense, but I guess it's just a lot of mixed emotions of being proud that we're doing this, but also feeling saddened by some of the things that I see. Thank you.
I want to just acknowledge your passion and commitment to the institution. And I'm confident that you're speaking for many members of Cougar Nation. And it's clear that you love it, not the institution, but the community. You love the people. And I think what Dr. Williams was showing us is that there are many people across campus doing wonderful things. The challenge has been with the organization. The challenge has been with the infrastructure of the institution, solidifying the strategic approach to this work in order to experience maximum impact. Okay? So, on one hand, we can take pride in the fact that we have so many people committed to serving our diverse community. On the other hand, just like if we were to go to a physician and get a checkup, we need to understand how to build muscle, how to build flexibility in order to perform at our peak level. And that's what Dr. Williams is helping us to think about and providing recommendations for us to do. I want to let Dr. Williams say a few words if he would like.
No, I think you echoed it, and you know, whenever you open up these conversations, there's pain and trauma that is there. You know, I think one of the fastest growing areas of conversation inside of diversity, equity, and inclusion is number one, the conversation around mental health and the mental health struggles that many of us are dealing with that have been exacerbated and elevated by the pandemic and the elevated trauma that we experienced during the pandemic, but also the elevated racial battle fatigue and DEI battle fatigue as the anti-Asian sentiment went through the roof, as the anti-Black dynamics that have been a part of our country for generations were further made transparent. And the collective ethos of just being in a moment of shared challenge. Mental health is through the roof. The first cousin to mental health is trauma. And so as we open these conversations up, I think it's so important for us to hold space to allow for us to get those things out. But I also think it's important for us also too to have an asset-based perspective, which means that we are never without an ability to do something. We always have something that we can build from. And I want to emphasize that Cal State University San Marcos has tons of things to build from. And there's a great energy about this that candidly we don't see everywhere we go. You know, some of the numbers are stark, but I could put up the comparative context and their numbers are stark too. So it's not as if your efforts in this regard are really outliers. In some ways, your low performance indicators as it relates to having an aligned agenda is where the field is right now of engaging this work. The themes that we heard in the listening sessions, they don't stand out for me as particularly unique, although they are yours. But the point is we're elevating the conversation. And so how do we take those themes? How do we take the report and ultimately have conversations about them that allow us to take some action steps moving forward? Because for me, I only like to elevate challenges if I'm going to engage the other side of the conversation, which is action steps for moving forward. And always having an asset-based growth mindset that we can always get better and we can always do some things to the positive. And the last thing I'll offer is this. I wrote this poem recently around joy. And I think it's so important for us to embrace joy in our life and to embrace joy inside this DEI work. This is not all negative. This is not all doom and gloom. There is joy in being asset-based and get better.
Have another question? And while they're searching, I think it's important to acknowledge we're not in a bad situation because we have us, because we can make the difference. because we are the answer that we're looking for. We can do this. Next question.
Hi, thank you so much for being here and for holding space in this moment. I have to say that for me in this presentation, the thing that really stuck out was the change methodologies. And I have been searching for a way to understand what I'm grappling with, and what I think my unit is grappling with. And this really helped me. So the recommendation, or preliminary recommendation, is to articulate, which change methodology that we're trying to use. And I would just like to hear a little bit more about, can we use both or pieces of both? Because there are some things that I would hate to lose,
Yes.
So thank you.
Absolutely. I think, and we started developing this theory of change, as I articulated here today, based upon a series of studies that I've been doing across the last couple years. And it's all starting to come together in terms of kind of meta insights. And one of the first things we did is we really studied the plans that were being developed immediately early in 2021 that were really elevating anti-racism. And I wanted to start seeing what those methods were. Every plan that we saw before 2021, none of them elevated anti-racism at a strategic level of methodology. I don't have any, and I make it my business to find them. I'm sure it's something out there, but not at the degree to which it was. Institutions move forward with that language. Many of them didn't understand what it meant to do anti-racism organizational change work. Dr. Ibram X. Kendi put phenomenal historical work in the world, which opened up a conversation, but in terms of a change method was not nearly there. But yet institutions, as we are wont to do, we start figuring stuff out, right? We start realizing we needed to do historical projects, peering into our past. We needed to look at buildings and naming conventions, that we needed to really start focusing into hearing the voices of individuals who felt as if they were being impacted, that we needed new types of questions on surveys, that we needed reparation scholarships have been developed at some places. Lots of things that was not a part of the conversation. I don't think any institution has to make a demonstrative choice of we're doing this method or that method. I think it's about forging a conversation collaboratively in a shared way to come up with the cohesive statement of where you want to go and what you want that to be, and pulling from the elements that ultimately becomes CSUSM's beautiful representation of a vision and a plan for the future. One of the things I would never want to do is to privilege a conversation of anti-racism and privilege a conversation of racial inequities, and at the same time ignore other inequities that are nested in the experiences and the realities of women, nested in the experience and the realities of precious transgender individuals, nested in the experience and reality of all of our folks and community which have to level up, and our students which have to lead in this diverse and global world. So for me, inclusive excellence is the overarching framing, but to have a theme within it of anti-racism demonstratively could be an approach that is used, and then operationalizing in some ways what that means. Inclusive excellence is about racial equity. It's just some pieces of the anti-racism methodology in language and in tactical action, which is different. And candidly, in certain institutional contexts, it's a non-starter. You couldn't do it. Right now we are partnered in, other parts of the country where they are under a level of assault as never seen before in American higher education, around not necessarily elevating an anti-racism change method, but any of this stuff. And then it's being falsely labeled in ways that are critical race theory, and falsely labeled in ways that are not consistent with what they're doing. And you're very fortunate that you're not in that type of strategic context. So to quote one of my favorite GMs after the NBA trade deadline, Rob Pelinka, you have strategic optionality here at CSU San Marcos, just like the Lakers do after those big acquisitions.
response. And I'm glad that Dr. Williams didn't suggest that we need to choose, right? But we do need to understand what our identity is, which I think is really important. And that's going to inform how we do the work going forward. And even if we have populations or groups or entities that embrace the anti-racism methodology, then we simply need to understand that methodology. That's the framework that they're operating out of. As a matter of fact, that has created tension for me as a leader and as a human being, understanding why do I feel as if the core essence of the issues that I'm dealing with are being missed in the work that I do daily. This has been a tension for me throughout my career. And I've learned the difference without Dr. Williams having to describe it to me, because I've lived it. And now I'm able to negotiate it in real time with my partners, which are you. Okay? That's how we move forward. That's how we identify the humanity in the work that we do. And that's how we meet people where they're at, by understanding the method that they're coming from or the framework. Any other questions?
Yes,
Dr.
there's
Allen?
one question online. Dr. Williams, someone is asking, it's an anonymous question, and someone wants to know, in the report, was there any mentioning of HR, MPPs, and anything around accountability for how staff is treated?
There was, excuse me, there was no direct mentioning of the Human Resources Department, nothing like that. But there was a mentioning in multiple places of staff feeling vulnerable and feeling as if there was in some ways a environmental reality where some staff felt as if they couldn't elevate their voice to their supervisors, that they felt unpsychologically safe to challenge the status quo, to raise issues that they found to be problematic. And there was also some sensing that we heard where some individuals felt as if there was retribution against individuals who did such things of elevating and challenging the status quo, and that they were quote moved out of the institution. So we definitely heard some of those themes throughout different focus groups or listening sessions. It wasn't a towering thing that was the most frequent thing we heard. But it was something that was heard, and in enough places that it elevated itself to being one of the 10 kind of insights that we wanted to highlight from our listening work. One of the things I'll offer is this. One, as I said before, whenever you open up these conversations of climate and inclusion, and so the listening sessions is just a qualitative methodology to hear the voice of climate and inclusion, to hear the voice of I feel safe, I don't, to hear the voice around the lived experience, different than when you do a survey. But irrespective of if it's survey or if it's listening, you're always going to get this type of thing in some way, shape, or form, oftentimes coming from staff. The question is then, what do we do with it, right? What do we do with that? A couple things we know to be important. One is, how do we ensure that our individuals who are people leaders, right? Managers, supervisors, deans, directors, department heads, those who lead others, in what ways are we preparing them to lead in diverse contexts of our staff that they lead, even our faculty that they lead? In what ways are we preparing them to handle tensions when those tensions emerge? In what ways do we build systems and processes for staff who want to elevate issues to elevate them? How do they elevate them? In what ways do they elevate them? Do we have various different types of bias, investigation, or review processes that are in place? So a part of it is a question of leadership and training. Another part of it is a question of how people can elevate and advocate for themselves. A third is a question of systems and processes. And last and definitely not least, for me, it oftentimes comes back to the quality of how we are interacting with one another on a day-to-day basis around all these things. I am a researcher and I'm a scholar, but I've been a global vice president with, 800 people reporting to me. I've worked at university with 1,000 people reporting to me. I've led teams for 20 years. And so, the degree to which we lead and how we create a culture of sharing, I think is so important now. We're moving to a place where everybody's becoming much more in touch with their voice, with their feelings, and with elevating issues. Some will say that's a negative. I personally think it's a positive, because when people can bring their whole and best self to the endeavor that we call CSUSM, I think we get more out of each of us when those folks feel like they're a part of something and it's good. That puts more pressure on us as leaders to build those types of environments where people feel very good at that. I didn't go into it today, but a recent McKinsey study was done on workforce departure across industries, across sector. Most frequent reason people are leaving is, number one, they felt they didn't feel a sense of belonging at work. And right there, closely following it, number two, I didn't feel as if my supervisor, my manager supported me, heard me, validated me. So we definitely heard some things, and those are some of my thoughts around how we resolve and move through those things.
Questions, Ariel? Okay. Any other questions here?
I have one question that came through
I
online
want
to me.
once again invite you to the QR code for suggestions primarily at this point. Please provide us feedback. That's what we need in order to continuously, take action steps forward. The next steps for us will be to
Dr. Allen?
invite Dr. Williams to campus with key stakeholders. And that doesn't mean necessarily the president's administrative team. It means you, okay? Opportunities for you to connect with him and me, and for us to create that safe space in action planning work, more specifically. OIE will be carrying the work forward in partnership with you, and I'm excited. And I'm going to tell you why. I'm not excited necessarily because our report may not have demonstrated the strength in certain areas as you may have expected. I'm excited because we know where we are and we have a plan to move forward. I'm excited because I know you all are committed to making this experience better. I'm excited because I know the leadership is committed as well. So go ahead, Ariel.
Dr. Damon received another question in Poll Everywhere, so I just want to make sure it gets acknowledged.
Yes, there was a question that came in. It was a really good question, and I don't have obviously all the answer to it, but the question was very simply is, I'd like to know the level of commitment at all levels of leadership, the university level, the unit level, the school level, to really have these conversations and to put real resources, i.e. money, forward towards systemic change. And so that was the question that came in. And Dr. Allen, you may have a response to that. My response to it would be as follows. One of the themes that we heard was critique of performative, right? And I elevated that with transparency and humility to the voices of those who shared that, because I believe it's important to honor individuals who are courageous and elevate those types of criticism. The second thing I would say is I am of the belief that commitment without currency is counterfeit, right? So if we're truly committed to something, there's always a currency investment to it. But the third thing I also want to say is that we know that every university is always balancing against many priorities and not having enough of the resources to do everything we want to do at any given time, including DEI at CSUSM. The trick is this: can we make more investments and the right investments in ways that more people feel it on a daily basis, that they can see change manifesting, not transformatively, because it doesn't happen that way, but incrementally. And the best way of getting there from my vantage is to take this thing from this up on high level, and as Dr. Allen noted, bringing it down to this next level down at the unit and the school level, and to breathe again air into it: accountability, integration, infrastructure, and resource. All four bring it together. So I didn't want to lose that question, Dr. Allen, because I never would want for anyone to think we were hiding from a question. That was a tough question. And so thank you so much for allowing me to come back on and present that question. I turn it back to you, friend.
Thank you for elevating the question. The question is critical. If you want to do anything, you have to have the ability to do it. You have to find a way to do that thing that you say is a priority. And I had this conversation with the president yesterday. And it's really important that we understand our condition, our health as an organization. It's important that we understand our ability and that we're able to align our expectations with the reality that we're in if we want to improve. Otherwise, we get discouraged about having expectations that don't connect with the reality, and we're never able to really leverage the synergy. We're never able to leverage the energy. We're never able to leverage the capacity that we actually have. So let's talk about some realities here. The reality is that you have a president that's very committed to diversity, equity, and inclusion. And she is committed to putting the resources into the work. There's a commitment there. There's a clear statement I want to make sure you hear. We have a journey to travel to connect those pieces. And there's activity that's dispersed all across campus, and people are doing great things. But we really don't know how much money we're putting into DEI efforts. We know what the Office of Inclusive Excellence receives. We know what our salaries are in that office, and we know what budget we operate with. But that's not the total commitment of the institution. So it's important that we're able to capture more effectively what we actually are doing across campus, financially and strategically, and we're able to align those efforts so we can produce better outcomes. So we can even be more effective in pursuing funding, whether it's grant writing or philanthropic giving or partnerships with industry. We have to take those steps to better understand our situation. It sounds like we have another question.
And I'm being mindful of the time. There's a question about training that someone wants to know, will we make it mandatory for MPP or leads to take an equity and inclusion training, and for that to be updated every semester, every year, because they believe that this can be a new start or a new beginning for our campus.
Dr. Williams, I'm going to take this question. Of course, Dr. Williams is going to say that's a great ideal. It's a best practice. If you're not doing it, it's probably something you want to consider doing. You need to tailor it to your institution and make the, the impact in the ways that make more sense to you. Now, we have some realities, right? We have this thing called unions, okay? And we want to respect unions, and we want to respect the relationship that is prescribed in service of our employees and the support that unions provide. What that means is that that relationship is going to determine what is really mandated in some cases. At the MPP level, there's more flexibility, perhaps. But I think what's really important is that we partner with our leaders all across campus to develop a strategy and a program to provide the training that we need. We definitely do need it. I think our VP for Finance and Administrative Services, VP Wyden, is working on some professional development opportunities, along with our AVP for HR and our AVP who's here, Brittany Brown. So it's on the horizon. Stay tuned. And with that, I think we are at 1:33. I want to give a special thanks to you all for being here, for sticking around and listening to this report out, engaging in this discussion. And I want to give a special thanks to Dr. Williams for being our partner along this portion of our journey. Please stay tuned for when we invite Dr. Williams to campus, and also please stay tuned for the invitation for us to join you in your units to be your partner in strategic success. Thank you all.
This was wonderful. I really enjoyed it. Thank you.